I'm Master Saturn. Thank you for joining me for another BDSM United podcast. Last time in our last podcast, we talked about uh, traditions and innovations and how we find ourselves somewhere in the middle, and that we find ourselves in whether we like it or not, we can't be absolutely traditional because we can't go back and live within the times that existed. In order to do that, we would have to be kind of like the Mennonites or the Amish. We would have to uh, do away with modern advances and go back and just have the same types of the same degree of technology that existed back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, maybe even the 70s, when our lifestyle, when BDSM was forming, and those traditions uh, were being put together, and the the traditions were being lived out. But because of where we live and what is available within our modern context, it's impossible to be exactly all those things. And so we have to weigh the cost, the benefits, and the consequences of innovation, and we have to find some kind of middle way. I ended last week's podcast telling everyone that we find our own power exchange relationship somewhat of a hybrid. Doesn't look exactly traditional, but it's somewhat innovative. But there really is nothing new under the sun. And I'm sure what we're doing, many other people do. And some people feel like they find themselves on the island of misfit toys. Like they feel like they just don't maybe seem to fit, that they feel slightly traditional. They don't feel like they just like anything goes. There should be some way to measure those things that are informed by tradition, but are yet still somewhat innovative. And so we find ourselves in this middle spot ourselves. And really, all modern people, whether they admit it or not, they find themselves in this middle place. And so, what is this hidden key to knowing whether your modern power exchange will work? What is this hidden key? And a lot of times when you ask people, what is the key to power exchange? What's the thing that makes something a power exchange relationship, or what's something that makes a power exchange relationship work, or makes it successful, or makes it healthy? What really is the key to a healthy, successful, workable power exchange relationship within BDSM? And oftentimes people will say communication. Well, you can communicate well, but your relationship doesn't necessarily have to work just because you can communicate. Arguments are a form of communication. Whining and complaining and speaking negatively and manifesting negative things are aspects of communication. So just because there's a heightened sense of communication doesn't mean that it's going to make for a healthy power exchange. A lot of times people say consent. Well, consent is definitely important. Consent is a lot of times the difference between what is and isn't BDSM involves consent. Yet we know that, especially with new people, for instance, they can consent to all kinds of awful things. They can consent to all kinds of terrible, unhealthy, just horrible things they can consent to have done to them or done around them. And so, consent, while it's super important, and while communication is certainly important, those things don't mean that your power exchange relationship is going to be healthy or successful. And it also doesn't uh, mean that it's going to work according to traditions, but yet being innovative. But really, that hidden key, I've said it in numerous podcasts, I've said it all over the internet, and people have loved to disagree with me. But I stand by this hidden key is consistency. Consistency is the hidden key to modern power exchange relationships. Here's the reason why. No matter what identity, no matter what no matter what identity, no matter what title, no matter what honorific I use, as long as I am consistently dominant or consistently submissive within that one relationship, then that relationship will tend to be healthy. It'll tend to be successful. It'll tend to work. So no matter, like, we find ourselves, my submissive and I, we find ourselves in a master slash little relationship dynamic. But what that all boils down to is that I'm, even though I use the honorific of master and I'm focusing on self mastery, and we have a lot of aspects of our relationship that are more authority transfer than they are power exchange. Uh, Even though I'm using that term master and she's not using the term slave, which is the traditional mixture of honorifics, I am consistently dominant in our relationship, and she is consistently submissive in our relationship. Now, sure, it takes other things to really make it healthy and successful. I'm not, I'm not saying that it doesn't take other things, because you could be in a consistently bad, healthy, unhealthy relationship. But really, as long as you are being consistently dominant or consistently submissive, then whatever you are doing, whatever titles you use for yourselves, you're not disrespecting the traditions that exist. And you can be as innovative as you want to be, as long as you are having an actual power exchange. So, kind of a short episode this week. In our next one, I'll talk about why certain things are not parts of power exchange relationship. And really, I'll talk about the negative aspects of consistency in our next episode. But really, as long as you are consistently dominant, even if you use the word daddy, and they are consistently submissive and they use the word slave, you can have bits and pieces and parts of your relationship that just, like, you can have some aspects of like a DDLG. And really, this can be any gender. I'm just going to use the male and female slash together. But if my partner was a little boy, then it would be like daddy little boy. Or if I was feminine or female presenting, I may use mommy and little boy, or mommy and little girl. Or you can really, gender, while it's not being totally represented in this teaching, I'm just picking something to use as a teaching example, but it's applicable to all genders, of course. So whether there's aspects of DDLG in a relationship, whether there's some aspects of MS in a relationship, see, what we find ourselves specifically is that we're not really DDLG, but she's definitely little in her personality type. The only time that she, and little as a submissive, the only time that she's not little is when she age plays. Yeah, you heard that right. The only time she's not little is when she age plays. Sometimes she has to age play as an adult to do some adulting things, but she is very much acting as an adult because she is very little all the time. And then, so, but we don't have aspects of uh, rewards and consequences, and we don't have a lot of rules because she is a very mature submissive, and she's always looking for, always approaching every situation in more of an MS mentality of she doesn't use a lot of rules and we don't have a lot of micromanagement. She approaches everything in a way that would be reflective of our relationship and beneficial and respecting. And she knows what would please me, and she will always do those things. And vice versa, there. I always do things when they come to our relationship. I always make choices where our relationship is the priority, and where our reputation is upheld within the community. And so we have more aspects of that, less micromanaging, more MS philosophy playing in our relationship. But then she's very much a little. So there would be aspects of, like, she calls me daddy, but no one else does, because I'm not anyone else's daddy. I'm just, to her, I'm daddy. And to me, she's baby girl, but nobody else is to call her that. Those are special titles that we have one for another, but those aren't titles that we would list ourselves as. So I list myself as Master Saturn and her as Little Libra, and we just go with that. It really works well for us. And we find ourselves in this hybrid, but the consistency is always there because 24/7, 365 days a year, at all times, in all circumstances, I am consistently dominant and she is consistently submissive within our relationship. If we stepped outside of our relationship, because we are polyamorous, but if we did step outside, then we could be other things to other people. But within our relationship dynamic, we are consistent. And if I was anything else to any other person, or she was anything else to any other person, she would need to be consistently that to that other person if it was to be a power exchange within that relationship. And, there would be, uh, whether they wanted to be or not, it would be including me in anything that she was a part of. And whether I wanted it or not, it would be including her in anything else that I'm a part of. And just to some degree or another, because the human element is that um, the partner of my partner is my partner, just even though I don't have to be physically connected to them or even emotionally connected to them. There is still the things that I do will uh, can and have the potential to uh, affect that other partner. And so we find that that's just the nature of polyamory. Probably a different conversation for a different podcast. But the hidden key to power exchange, knowing whether it's traditional or whether it's if it was being disrespectful to tradition, then that consistency wouldn't be there, and I would be fluctuating between dominant and submissive, or she would. And while switches can be one thing to one person or one thing to another person, as far as power exchange is concerned, switches do not are not both things within the same relationship, and that's where you start to get into trouble. And if that consistency isn't there, and one of us is fluctuating, then that will cause chaos in our power exchange, and it'll cause some unhealthy things because how do you hold each other accountable if you're both in charge? And or if you're in charge one time and then not in the other, and it's just a lot of ridiculousness and chaos, and it just trust us, it doesn't work in the long term. What we call that is topping and bottoming. When there's not a consistency there, then it's not power exchange. It's just topping and bottoming for scenes, and that's perfectly fine. That's perfectly something that people can do when they're just playing. But when it's a power exchange relationship, that consistency is there. I'm Master Saturn. You can find me and Little Libra at mastersaturn.com. You can find all of our podcast resources and a lot of other things as well at bdsmunited.com. It was a joy speaking with you today, and I will talk with you again soon.